right. I don't see any of the homeowners out here. In fact, it looks like it's pretty well deserted out here. I believe some of the people, just picked up most of their belongings and just kind of went to higher grounds because this Malibu Creek, it used to be a creek now. It's just a roaring rapid river out here. We're just flying over Malibu Country Mart, and that's the business area that you saw that was being inundated with water out here.
This occurred about 18 years ago. The same thing happened where a number of businesses were lost in this area because they got 2 or 3 feet of water and sewage spill came through the stores.
The first part of my presentation that I'll go into are recommendations for lagoon and wetlands restoration. And that first one is divided into 2 options. The first objective that we had was to restore as much of the historic lagoon habitat in the lagoon area as possible. The lagoon is much smaller than it used to be, and it's being made to handle much more water than it used to in pristine times, or before we brought imported water into the watershed and before the lower Malibu Creek area was developed. And this has created a lot of problems for the ecosystem, not just in terms of public health and water quality, but also with problems of more an environmental nature and habitat nature. So the first objective was to restore as much of the lagoon as possible. And we have long-term high-priority recommendation. And that is to restore and reconnect sites A1, A2, and A3. I must preface by saying this is all predicated upon there being willing sellers of these private properties. So we're not proposing to do anything that the landowner would not want. The landowner must sell the property first, obviously. The public already owns Site A1, and that is the restored lagoon that was done in 1983. However, it doesn't really function as well as it should. And to really make that lagoon function and approximate what its original size would be, we really feel that it's necessary to eventually acquire, when the seller becomes willing, Sites A2, which is the golf course, and Site A3, which is the empty lot across from the Chevron station. We envision that as being the what really the extent that the lagoon should have. So that's a long-term, high-priority recommendation. That's Objective 1, restore historic natural lagoon. Objective 2 is to create wetlands that are capable of treating urban runoff and or excess creek flows. As we all know, the upper watershed is becoming more and more developed, and with that comes excess and additional runoff, and that runoff carries urban pollutants. And so we recognize that there is a need to have some kind of treatment wetlands, hopefully in the Civic Center area, that would treat this runoff before it enters into the lagoon. This does not preclude the option of establishing habitat in these areas as well. So you could have treatment wetlands that also function as habitat. The first long-term high-priority recommendation is to create an interconnected series of constructed treatment wetlands in sites C2 and C3. On the map, Site C2 is the famous chili cook-off site, and Site C3 are the 3 empty properties surrounding the City Hall. So it says C3 above the City Hall, but it also includes the properties to the east and to the west. These sites could be linked up, and when water is brought into them and some of the fill removed, could be recreated as treatment wetlands to help remove some of the pollutants before being connected into the lagoon, which hopefully would include sites A2 and A3. The first step would be to initiate a study to identify the most cost-effective combination of wetlands projects, and the desired result is the highest level of nutrient and pathogen removal from storm flows and or creek flows before entrance to the lagoon and Surfrider Beach. And for wetland projects that are considered equal in the cost-benefit analysis, projects that create or enhance wildlife habitat would be favored. And I would like to point out that we achieved a lot of agreement. Obviously, we hope that some of the sellers will become willing sellers in these properties. We feel it's very, very important to realize that we have only one Malibu Lagoon, and it's a very important habitat. And we hope that we'll have the opportunity to implement some of these restoration and treatment wetland strategies in the future. And just to show you that there are much more extreme things that were discussed, one of the items that was discussed but not addressed in these recommendations was actually moving the part of the shopping center that is adjacent to B1 out of harm's way. Obviously, it would have to be with the agreement of the landowners. And we don't see this as something that will happen immediately. However, it is quite obvious that the creek is moving in that direction. And rather than see continuing channelization and riprap and concreting of the channel, some members of the task force propose that perhaps the building should be moved so that the creek can do what it wants to do.